Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today we're going to be addressing some Curtis Samuel rumors. I know his name has bubbled to the surface in recent days in connection with the New York Giants and as a potential wide receiver option this free agency period. I'm really interested about Samuel. I haven't seen enough of him. I really haven't done any deep diving into what he brings to the table, if he's a good option for the Giants, and really how they would utilize him on offense. After doing a little bit more digging and some research, he actually is a pretty dynamic player who I'm excited to talk about with Anthony and really break down for you guys and give you an idea of what a player of his magnitude and what he's capable of doing and how the Giants might be able to fit him into their scheme. It's going to be interesting, especially with Jason Garrett and the way he calls plays, but we're interested to see if it's a match, if they can actually figure out how to utilize a player of his quality. But Anthony, before we dive into Curtis Samuel, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Happy Valentine's Day to all the listeners or watchers on YouTube. I know that this video is going to be up a day later, so I hope you had a happy Valentine's Day and treated your date right. So there's that. And then, of course, Curtis Samuel. I'm excited to talk about him because he's somebody who has been connected to the Giants a lot because he has that connection with Dave Gettleman, right? He's, Curtis Samuel plays for the Carolina Panthers, and Dave Gettleman used to be the general manager there, so everybody wants to make that instant connection that Dave Gettleman is going to be interested in signing Curtis Samuel this offseason because the connection makes sense, but then, of course, the Giants do need a wide receiver, so that just makes it make even more sense. Like last offseason when the Giants needed a cornerback and James Bradberry was available. Connection made sense, the need was there, the signing happened. So you could see that happen again with Curtis Samuel. I could definitely see that happening, but he's a very interesting player. Like you mentioned, Alex, it would be very interesting to see how he fits into Jason Garrett's offense. I think that's kind of where things get a little muddy in the water, and you really got to look at it and say, he's a good player. Curtis Samuel is a really good player, but will he fit this scheme, this team, and what they're trying to do on offense? That's really the question, and I guess that's what we're going to get into and break down, Alex, isn't it?
Yes, that is right, sir. And as Anthony said, happy Valentine's Day to everybody, the women, the girls, and the men. I hope everyone had a really good day. So, essentially, Curtis Samuel is an interesting prospect, really, for the Giants as a free agent signing. I think he's probably one of the mid-tier guys based on the production he's shown, but he's actually capable of being a lot better than you would think. And it really comes down to how the offense is called around him. He's a guy that you design plays around. We talked about Rondale Moore. Our film review with Chris Entertainer just dropped yesterday, so go check that out. And you're seeing a player with that dynamism, that ability to, create plays after the catch, that yards after the catch kind of ability, and just that unique ability to make players miss in the open field, and then those extra yards that you pick up as you go. That's really where the benefit is of having a guy like Curtis Samuel. He's a 4.31 40-yard dash receiver coming out of college. He's been with the Panthers for a couple of years now, 4 years in total. He was there when Dave Gettleman was GM, so there is that connection. Obviously, the Giants did sign James Bradberry this past offseason, so you know that there is a connection there. You know that he has the experience with those players. And he's only 24 years old. The guy is really, really young, which is a positive sign. So if the Giants were to go and actually sign Curtis Samuel, they know they're getting a young receiver with plenty of potential left. 24 years old is a baby. I think Kenny Golladay is a little bit older. I think Allen Robinson's around 28 or something. So you're getting a guy who you can sign for 3 or 4 years, push that cap space, that cap hit down the road, and feel comfortable knowing that he's not going to regress. He's only going to get better and better and better. But his statistics really are what stand out to me. He had over 1,000 total yards from scrimmage this year. They can use him in very dynamic ways as a running back. And since Deion Lewis is off the books now, thank the Lord, they really underutilized Deion Lewis. He's a receiving back that they had him running on draw plays and not really utilizing him as a receiver, which I would like to see more of. So when you have a guy like Curtis Samuel, it takes some of the pressure off of Saquon Barkley, especially if you can use 2 running back sets, using 12 personnel, 22 personnel. It really helps the offense get more creative, but it comes down to Jason Garrett. Can we trust him to be more creative? Because, we saw him with the end-around plays occasionally. Evan Ingram, dropped the one and fumbled against the Rams. Then you have the other ones that Sterling Shepard had, the one specifically I remember against Dallas in Week 17 where he scored a touchdown on. You have Sterling Shepard running those. Curtis Samuel does it even better. He can really utilize that elite speed. Someone compared Sterling Shepard to Curtis Samuel and said, those are similar players. They're really not at all. And you're going to see on YouTube as I post clips throughout this video, he's able to pinpoint high catches. He can make pretty spectacular grabs. He also is really good on wide receiver screens, end arounds from a running back position, on drag routes. He's really fast and he creates separation in the shallow portions of the field. And why that is so essential for the Giants is that their offensive line is such a liability in pass protection. They ranked in the bottom of the league this past year in pass protection efficiency. When you have that as an issue, you need receivers who can get open in the intermediate to short portions of the field, and he can do that and create separation there. So it really gives Daniel Jones a security blanket underneath that he can rely on to get open and be available. Whereas this past season, the Giants didn't really have any of those speed guys that had good short, intermediate route running abilities. Sterling Shepard is that guy, but he's not the fastest player on the field. He's more of a finesse player than a speed guy. So, Anthony, how do you see the Giants utilizing a player like Curtis Samuel? Because, we talked about Rondale Moore, we talked about Jalen Waddle. He has similar traits to them in terms of that dynamism and that ability to create after the catch. How do you think that they would do this, or do you think they prefer to go with a rookie in the draft instead of an established player like Curtis?
Well, I think what's interesting about Curtis is you mentioned him as an established player, which I guess, yes, he is, but he's also a player that really hasn't entered his prime yet. You mentioned it, 24 years old. He's still just, getting his footing in the NFL and establishing himself as a top-tier wide receiver. A lot of people do see him that way. A lot of people don't. That's because he's still working at it. He's still only 24 years old. Devontae Smith is 22. They're not that far off, right? And Curtis Samuel's been in the league for a few years, so he's really still growing as a player. And I think that his ceiling really is a wide receiver one, a really good dominant player. One thing that I'll say, though, with Curtis Samuel is he might not be the wide receiver that Giants fans want. I know a lot of Giants fans really want that big body X receiver, that outside wide receiver that can make contested catches. Well, if you go look at the statistics on Pro Football Focus, Kenny Galladay, that's a name that we've mentioned a lot as that big body outside wide receiver. He made 36 contested catches this past season. Allen Robinson made 44. Curtis Samuel only made 11. So he's really not that go up there. He can do it. We've seen him do it for Carolina, where he goes up there, makes a contested catch, mosses somebody. We've seen him do it, but he doesn't do it often. That's not really his game. His game is more get out in space and be very dynamic, as you mentioned. And that really ties in when you look at him as a running back, and that's where things get really interesting. Because Curtis Samuel very much is a Swiss Army knife in the Carolina Panthers offense. Now, granted, they had Joe Brady calling the plays and running the play design, so he can make anyone look amazing, I think, after what we saw him do at LSU, right? Joe Brady is a tremendous mind in the NFL, young and up-and-coming coordinator. But he did an excellent job with Curtis Samuel because he used him in a variety of ways that just maximized his talents. He put him in the backfield. He always had him, he was actually a very efficient runner. I think he averaged over 4 yards per carry. I'm going to check on that real quick. He averaged 4.9 yards per attempt, so that's really impressive. And the previous season, 2019, he had half of the rushing attempts, but he averaged 6.8 yards per attempt. So he's actually a really solid running back. I think one thing that you could look at with the Giants if they were to sign Curtis Samuel is they would be getting a very explosive and dynamic wide receiver with the ability to make a lot of plays, but they would also be getting like their backup running back, and I think that's pretty cool. Really nice change of pace back for Saquon Barkley. If Saquon Barkley's running really hard, Saquon Barkley is coming off of an injury. I don't think he's going to necessarily be ready to take the same snap total that he did the previous season, right? So if he needs to have his snaps limited in some way, Curtis Samuel is actually a really solid option to be that backup running back for Saquon Barkley. He's a great runner. He's really dynamic, can make people miss at a very high rate, actually. He breaks a lot of tackles. He's really shifty. Great change of direction, all of that. Really exciting and fun to watch player more than anything. And, like I said, he's only 24. He hasn't hit his ceiling, and I think that's really where you look at him, you look at the Giants, you say, we're a young team, we've got a young quarterback and, a young group of playmakers that are all trying to grow together, and you can maybe pair Daniel Jones with Curtis Samuel and watch as the years go on, them growing together and becoming one of those dynamic duos, one of those really great passing and receiving duos.
Yeah, when it comes to Curtis Samuel, a former second-round pick, 40th overall selection, he is kind of in the range where Rondale Moore might be picked. So you could say, there's a trade-off here. Would you rather go with Moore, who's been injured and only played 7 games over the last 2 years, or would you want to go with Samuel? And I think, Samuel is an interesting player because you look at where his numbers really come from, and he's targeted heavily in the middle of the field from the line of scrimmage to about 20 yards range. That's where he's targeted the most. The middle of the field is where he thrives. Middle of the field within 10 yards on those drag routes across the middle. He sits down on curl routes. That is where he actually makes his money. And he's very, very good. He got 21 of 22 passes. So he's a trusted kind of player that you can utilize in that space. And why I think that's important is that the Giants force-fed Evan Ingram the ball in that area in 2020, and he dropped like 5 or 6 of them, and they ended up being interceptions. When you're targeting and force-feeding the ball towards the middle, like short middle of the field, you need guys who can actually catch the football. Curtis Samuel can do that. And you do think, Anthony, like if they're going to use Curtis Samuel in that way, in that short yardage kind of situation way, where they're kind of forcing him, especially when your pass blocking isn't doing well, would you rather them have a guy like that and just use Evan Ingram to stretch the field, push the seams vertically, and then have Samuel go underneath? Because I think that's actually what the Giants might try to do, really try to push Evan Ingram downfield and have guys like Samuel who are fast, can get open, create separation against mismatched linebackers and safeties or slot corners. Maybe that's where they want to utilize him the most, on that short, intermediate, in the middle of the field portion.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, theory about what they would do with Curtis Samuel, because the way that I see it, when I watch the Giants offense last season, I see kind of the opposite, where they weren't really pushing Evan Ingram vertical that often. They did at times, and when they did, it was pretty efficient. He definitely got open a lot of the times, and he did make a few huge receptions, but he also dropped a couple. We could think about the one against Philadelphia on Thursday night. That was a vertical route. That was a really nice outside release go route that he did, and then he dropped the ball and dropped our playoffs onto the dirt. So that sucked, but he was really not the vertical threat at all times. They mixed that in there when they needed a big play downfield. It seemed like they'd like to send Evan Ingram vertical, but for the most part, his route tree was a lot of just like 5-yard curls and hooks and a lot of flat routes. Not a lot of drags for some reason. Alex, you and I have discussed that many times. We would like to see more drags with Evan Ingram. Drag routes are really efficient, really nice shallow crossers. I like that with Evan Ingram. But we didn't see that a lot, but we did see a lot of curls and hooks. So I think that really realistically, I think they would make him the short receiving option and then try to push Curtis Samuel vertical because he does have such great speed and athleticism. Even though he does make a lot of his plays in the short to intermediate region. He did that a lot in Carolina. But I think that, they would just try to expand on Curtis Samuel's talents and athleticism and really try to push him into the more vertical big play role.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to get at, is really, are they going to utilize him as a vertical kind of guy? Because, last year he did finish with about 270 yards, 20-plus yards downfield. When he was targeted 20-plus yards downfield, he finished about 270 yards. He caught almost every pass, which was nice, and he had 2 touchdowns. So we know that they do target him. He, that's about a quarter of his yardage was downfield passes, which is nice. It's good to see that he is capable of doing that. And an even more interesting thing is really how he played in this Panther system. He played in the slot 399 snaps, and on outside 177 snaps. So about half of the number of his snaps he played in the slot, he played out wide. And it's good to see that the versatility is there. Like, you can use him in different ways, in different formations, use him on wide receiver screens on the outside.
I'll throw something out there about that statistic with the slot. That is based on the fact that the Carolina Panthers signed Robbie Anderson in free agency last offseason. Curtis Samuel initially was playing on the outside. He played more slot, and he did play a lot of outside, so the versatility, as you mentioned, is key. But he did move into the slot based on the change in Carolina's personnel.
Right. So there's that too. And the Giants, they do have Darius Slayton, they do have Sterling Shepard, they do have Dante Pettis. How do you really figure that out? And at the same time, even if they do go and sign Curtis Samuel, I expect them to get an offensive playmaker in the first 2 rounds. Whether it's Devonta Smith that drops, he didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl. He didn't really do much because of his finger, injured in the national championship game. But he's a player that could easily fall. There could be teams that feel concerns with his weight, his size, and if he falls to 11, now you have your outside receiver, you have your number 1 wide receiver on the outside, and you have Curtis Samuel in the slot, you have Sterling Shepard on the opposite side, and Evan Ingram and Saquon Barkley. That offense, if they can't succeed with an offense with those type of playmakers, it's all on Jason Garrett, and there has to be some on Daniel Jones as well. But I think Curtis Samuel isn't the only player they would go and get. There has to be some sort of playmaker in the draft as well who's going to be a very, very good talent, and that's what you're looking to do. You're trying to play off of a Curtis Samuel signing and see what player falls to you and if it's the right move. Whether it's Kyle Pitts, Devonta Smith, I think Jalen Waddle. I wouldn't even be afraid to sign or draft Jalen Waddle and Curtis Samuel. You could do some very interesting things just lining them up outside, inside, and just the versatility they create. But I think, when it comes to Curtis Samuel, it really boils down to the play calling and how creative you're going to get. with him. And, this is Anthony was saying this before the podcast. His friend told him who was a Panthers fan. He's a player capable of being a very, very good talent. But if you don't have the play caller around him and you're not utilizing his versatility and his actual qualities, he's going to be good but not great. But that's the thing. He has the capability of being great. And that's where the hype and the optimism comes from, is when you have a player that's capable of being that good, who has a 4.3 speed, his elite speed, he's smaller, he's capable of creating yards after the catch, breaking tackles, making people miss into open field, that versatility as a running back, then you can get kind of creative with your offensive play calling. That's when you can take risks and push players downfield and feel confident that you have guys that can make plays and get it done. But, Anthony, do you trust Jason Garrett to actually figure that out? Because I know we keep going back and forth all the time about this specifically, but I don't feel very confident with Jason Garrett. But as Freddie Kitchens, just took a head offensive assistant role, he kind of got a promotion there. Maybe he's going to be more involved in the play calling and designing plays. When you have guys with that much experience, I would have to assume that they are capable of creating unique plays around specific talents, like a guy like Curtis Samuel. So maybe not. They'd be able to figure it out. What do you think?
So here's what I have to say about him fitting into Jason Garrett's scheme, which I think is kind of interesting. I mentioned earlier that I predict they would bring him in and they would make him more of a vertical threat and, continue to work Evan Engram underneath. Now, I have some statistics to back that up, right? So in 2019, that's, 2 seasons ago, Curtis Samuel's average depth of target was 15.1 yards, which was 16th out of 124 wide receivers with at least 25 targets. So he was very much a vertical threat. He was being pushed downfield and running deep routes. 2020, once Joe Brady got to town, you would think with that system, he would be running a lot more deep passing or deep routes, right? 2020, his average depth of target fell from 15.1 all the way down to 6.3, which was 111th out of 118 wide receivers with at least 25 targets. So that's super interesting. Now, when Pro Football Focus gave their analysis on this, they said that he was the new and improved Curtis Samuel this year, and that he actually fit really well into this role, working the underneath, because a lot of these new NFL offenses are built around quick outs and a quick passing game. So it's not necessarily the fact that they're just running 5-yard curls like they were in Jason Garrett's offense, but it's the fact that he is such a quick and good route runner that he runs those out routes and he can catch those and then make a ton of yardage after catch. So that's kind of an interesting analysis there. So I do think that he could fit into Jason Garrett's scheme predicated on that. It's just like, will Jason Garrett choose 2019 Curtis Samuel, the vertical threat who's getting 15.1 yards per target? Or will he choose the 2020 new and improved Curtis Samuel that's going to work the underneath? Maybe he gets all those shallow crossers that we've been banging the table for, turns those into big plays with yards after catch, runs a lot of nice quick outs on a 3rd and 3. That could be how they utilize Curtis Samuel in the New York Giants offense, and I think that's something that's really interesting. One more thing that I want to throw out there, though, kind of unrelated to that topic, but still to Curtis Samuel. His calculated market value, according to SpotRack, is very interesting, and I want to get your take on that, Alex. $12.4 million on average annually. Now, how do we feel about that with Curtis Samuel? For me, personally, I think that's a fair price, and I would be willing to pay that in the right scenario for the Giants. If Kenny Galladay's not there and we can't sign him, if Allen Robinson, we can't sign him, Curtis Samuel will not be my first choice. He will be like my 3rd or 4th choice, maybe even 5th choice. I don't know. I got to really look at this wide receiver class. So would I be willing to pay that much for my 5th choice? Well, because we have such a need and I think we really need that playmaker, I would, and I do like him as a player. So I think the $12.4 million on average annually is fair, though it is kind of steep in some aspects and could really tie down our cap space. But it would tie it down a lot less than a Kenny Galladay contract would anyway. So, yeah, what do you think of $12.4 million?
So I just wrote an article, and I actually pretty much mimicked that exactly. Coincidentally, I said I would pay no more than $13 million per season for him. And the reason that I put $13 million as a number is because he hasn't proven to be like 1,000 yards every single season. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. Like, if your playmakers aren't going to get it done, you have to be confident your guys are going to be able to maximize a player of his value. But here's the reality, is that he is capable of being great. He's capable of being that good. He's capable of being an elusive, versatile, dynamic type of player who can create on offense and really score points for you at a very healthy rate. The question is, do you have the guys to get it done? And $13 million, in my opinion, $12.4 million, that's a pretty fair valuation. I would be fine with that because think about it in this scenario. The Giants go out and sign Allen Robinson for $20 million, let's say. You could do this instead. You could get Curtis Samuel for 12.4, draft somebody at number, in the 11th overall pick, draft somebody and still be under the $20 million cap hit. So you're really getting 2 for 1, because if you get Allen Robinson, you're not getting Dalvin Tomlinson, and you have to make a decision between Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams. So you're putting yourself in a really bad situation. I think that's a pretty good, fair value. And honestly, this whole cap situation is really hurting the Giants so much because they're going to have to settle for the mid-tier guys. They're not going to be able to go after Allen Robinson. Kenny Galladay is likely going to be franchise tagged, and if that happens, they might try and trade him and get some sort of value back. And I don't think the Giants are trying to give away assets right now. So I would say they probably go with a mid-tier guy like Corey Davis or Curtis Samuel. I'd be fine with Curtis Samuel after checking him out, doing a little bit more in-depth research on him. He is able to be a great player, and I think having that type of talent on your offense, you're going to be better. Your team is going to get better. Your offense is going to average more than 17.5 points per game. I mean, the one statistic that really stands out to me is he finished 2020 with almost an 80% catch rate, which is unbelievable. That tells me he has very sure hands. He does not drop the football. He's consistent. And that is something I like to see. He doesn't get injured very often. I mean, he played 15 games this year, 16 games the year before, 13 the year before that. He's played a good number of games. I think he only started in 5 games, but I think that's just the way they use him. So I really think it's curious to see these numbers.
Yeah, the reason that it says 5 games started is because he plays a lot in the slot, and so if the first snap that the Carolina Panthers are out there is 12 personnel, only 2 wide receivers on the field, then he doesn't start, but he plays starter numbers. He's out there all the time, and because he's playing the slot, that's not considered a starting position. But in their offense, the slot receiver is on the field for the majority of the time, so he got 97 targets. He's a starter, right? So, and one thing that I'll say though with the Sterling Shepard comparison that was kind of interesting, I kind of do see it statistically. I don't see it when I watch the players individually, but statistically I kind of see it because I see players that got better year to year have not cracked 1,000 yards, either one of them. Sterling Shepard's never done it. Curtis Samuel has yet to do it. But we do kind of see like a really solid ceiling there, right? All-purpose yards he did, yes, because he is, receiving yards though he hasn't. Career high this year, 851 receiving yards, and this was with the shorter average depth of target, which is interesting to take note of. More yardage, shorter depth of target, so that's an interesting statistic. And then of course, yes, he is making plays as a running back in the backfield, which I love. I think that is so dynamic and interesting. If the Giants did sign him, he got 41 rushing attempts this year. I would actually like to see him top 50. Not to take away snaps from Saquon Barkley, but just to be a really nice change of pace or change of pace rather.
Too. And you have to ease Saquon in after the injury, so it's good to have a guy like that.
Exactly. So I think that is such an electric, dynamic thing that I would really be excited to see for the Giants. And then in terms of obtaining the personnel, right? So let's say that they do go out there and they sign him for about $13 million. And you mentioned in round 1, maybe they go after a guy like Kyle Pitts or Devontae Smith if he falls, or Jalen Waddle or somebody. Well, I'll even throw out that in the second round, there's a lot of really talented wide receivers. And I think that you could potentially look at like a Terrace Marshall because, Curtis Samuel is really dynamic and he does a lot of things, but no, he isn't that outside wide receiver that Giants fans really want. And I think the Giants actually really do feel like they want, like Giants front office feels that way, and I think that's why they called for Kenny Galladay. They feel like they need that big outside presence. So that could maybe be Terrace Marshall. Maybe you could go Curtis Samuel and then round 2 a wide receiver, or maybe even number 11 overall. We talked about this, Rashad Bateman. Maybe they could even go with him right there at 11, and then he can be on the outside, and you can move Curtis Samuel all over the place, and maybe you can look into moving Sterling Shepard back in the slot, though I think he's more comfortable on the outside as his trainer told us and as the statistics seem to indicate. But I think that, more playmakers the better. I've been saying that, Alex. So if they want to draft or sign Curtis Samuel and then double dip, get a wide receiver or tight end early in the draft, I'd be all for that. And Curtis Samuel, I am totally on the Curtis Samuel hype train. I think that he's a really talented player that could really change the Giants' offense and add a whole new layer to it, a whole new layer of electricity and versatility to it. But, I would be cautiously optimistic with the signing as well. He would not be my first choice, and I don't know if I can bank on Jason Garrett using him and maximizing his potential.
That's pretty much the gist of it. And I think, one thing that did cross my mind was just a scenario that, I was just thinking about a second ago. And essentially it revolves around, if they did go out and get Curtis Samuel, and then in the draft they decided, okay, let's trade back a couple spots to the 20 range. You get Rashad Bateman, who we've already done a film breakdown of. Very, very talented route runner, a finesse type of guy, great release packages. He gets into space, he creates separation. He has that ability. He doesn't have elite speed, but he has the ability to create separation with finesse and really great route running and just baiting wide receivers to make, or rather corners to make premature moves and then crossing them. So I really think if they were to do something like this, sign Curtis Samuel, trade back, acquire a second-round pick, whether you have to pair, the 11th pick and a third-rounder to acquire another second-rounder, find a way to get another second-round pick, and you can do this, basically. You get Rashad Bateman, and then you have 2 second-round picks. You can go, and, if you want to get an offensive tackle, you could get offensive tackle and put him at right tackle to start. Let him and Matt Parrott battle it out. I think that would be a good move. And then, you also have the ability to go and get an edge rusher in the second round, or you can get Pat Freiermuth. You could do a bunch of different things. So I think, interesting scenarios. If you traded back, this is a good time to do it because the Giants have holes they need to fill, and the second round is a perfect place to do it, especially if they have, the 43rd and let's say the 50th pick or something like that. There are guys there that they can fill that will start immediately. You know what I mean? Like there are talented wide receivers in the second round they could go for if they wanted to, or, just at defenders, a linebacker, who knows? So that's kind of where my head's at. They have cornerbacks, plethora of cornerbacks in this draft. So I'm pretty interested to see what they do. I think trading back would be a decent scenario to consider, especially if they can still land one of the primo wide receivers in the draft, right?
I'm a huge proponent of trading down. I would love to see the Giants do it. I really hope to see them do it. I think that at number 11, unless one of those top 3 wide receivers falls, they should trade down. I think they can maximize their value of that 11th overall pick by trading down, and I do think they'll still be able to find their offensive weapon in the first round if they do trade down. Rashad Bateman would be the number 1 guy to keep an eye on. So, yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. You know that, Alex. And I'm just saying there's so many scenarios for this offseason. It's really interesting to see, we're thinking about Curtis Samuel, Kenny Golladay. It's going to be really interesting to see because we're laying out a lot of these scenarios and we're predicting who might sign here and whatever. We could be completely right or completely wrong, but, man, I just hope that the offense improves next year. More than anything, 17.5 points per game will never get it done. If they feel that Curtis Samuel is the guy that can at least help us crack 20 points per game, freaking sign him. You know what I mean? The offense needs to be fixed. Bring in as many pieces as you can and just fix it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. So before we log off here and say a bit our adieus, what is your projected, let's say, contract for Curtis Samuel if there was going to be? If they did sign him, what do you think it would look like?
I think it goes 5 years, actually. I think that they would sign him to a 5-year deal because he is 24 years old. And, that's pretty common when you have a wide receiver free agency. When you're signing him, it usually is like a 5-year extension. And if you think about this, the cap space is going to shrink this year. It's going to continue to go up. And if you look at how wide receiver contracts have paced out over the years, $13 million, if that were the number, $13 million annually, 3 years from now, that's a steal. And then you'll have 2 extra years on that contract in 3 years. So 5-year deal, $13 million on average annually, that would be a really solid contract in my opinion.
Yeah, I think they would do 4 years and then an out after the 3rd year. Just because a player like that is so dynamic and not every coordinator knows how to utilize him properly. Of course, injuries are always a concern, but I don't think that I'm not too worried about that at his age. But it really comes down to utilizing him the proper way. And I think having that out after the 3rd year really helps you and gives you a little bit of wiggle room because 5 years, the Giants are trying to stay away from that right now. They're trying to do more 3-year deals, but I think 4 years is a good option for them because they can really backload that money to the 2nd and 3rd year and really help them sign Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson this season and keep them around. So that's kind of where my head's at. I think 3 years out after the 3rd year, and then you have a 4th year if the team actually wants to extend him for that range. But I think that's pretty reasonable, about 12, 13 million per season. So I think that might be something to be curious for the Giants. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this Curtis Samuel video, and we will catch you guys on the next one.